And here we are together for another episode of Disruptive Conversations. And these conversations are dedicated to disrupting what may be getting in your way, holding you back, so that you can move forward powerfully into your own journeys and the success of what you want according to how you see success from your vantage point. And today I am really thrilled to have Gretchen Carlson on. We'll be talking some more and I'll be introducing her shortly, waiting for Gretchen to come on. And at this point, talking about women's advocacy, fighting for women's rights is so powerful. We need to be on this every single day. As much work that has been done is more work to be done. And I'm looking for Gretchen. I don't quite see her yet, but it will happen shortly. And I see lots of people coming on. You don't want to miss this one. Gretchen was one of the pivotal and instrumental people in changing laws about sexual harassment and how sexual harassment can be addressed on the in the workplace, and women's hands were tied. Gretchen's on. She's requesting coming on. We're going to see this happen. All right, I'm waiting for the buffer. And here we go. And we are seamless. Gretchen, we are seamless on this. That was an outstanding getting onto Instagram live and in a timely fashion.
I'm here. Great to see you.
Fantastic. So I'm going to be introducing the show, introducing myself, introducing you, and then we are off and running together. So welcome everyone to Disruptive Conversations, in which we deep dive into the experiences of entrepreneurs, influencers, thought leaders, journalists, educators, and we deep dive into the experiences that women have needed to navigate and conquer in order to have achieved their personal and professional success up to this point in time. I'm Dr. Risa Reiger, clinical psychologist, and I'm an expert in change. I help people make positive change at any point, and it's never too late to make positive change. However, in order to create change, you need to disrupt. You need to disrupt a thought, a feeling, a belief, a habit, an action, a behavior in order to create your 10.0 life. And that's what this series of conversations is all about. And today, to help us on that journey, I am thrilled and honored to welcome Gretchen Carlson. And Gretchen is a New York Times bestselling author. She's a journalist, and Gretchen is also a fierce, relentless, and persistent advocate for women's rights. She boldly brought accusations against Roger Ailes, who was the chairman of Fox News, and won. And this was life-changing. It helped set a path and a precedent for the Me Too movement. Gretchen has gone on to create a nonprofit in which, pardon me, lift our voices. And as it is said, no one pays a lot of $1 million for false accusations. No one. And so Gretchen is here. This is in reference to Roger Ailes and the settlement that Gretchen received. And so with tremendous courage and determination, Gretchen went through this particular phase in her life and is here to be in a conversation. So Gretchen, welcome. I'm so thrilled to have you here today.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for the kind introduction. And I'll just add to that most women who go through situations like this of harassment or any kind of sexual misconduct in their life really just want to be able to continue doing what they were doing, right? And unfortunately, we still live in an era where the women who have the courage to come forward end up being the ones that are ultimately, shoved to the side. So that's what really inspired me to do something about this after my horrible story and experience, was to try to turn it into a positive. And how do I help other women who are also experiencing this? Unfortunately, tons of us are. I always say every woman has a story. And how do I turn this into something to reinvent my life, to help other people? And that's exactly what I've done.
So to carry on with that thought, Gretchen, what is it that you needed to disrupt inside of yourself in order to have been able to make this change and to go forward at a time when that really wasn't done? I mean, in
Yeah,
terms of
well,
charges, yeah.
yes. Well, first of all, coming to the decision to actually take action against the most powerful man in the media business in the world, is not something that you just decide like the day before. I mean, this is, building, like walking into this takes, in my case, took years for me to get to the point where I actually thought that I could do it. And I would just point to the importance of close people around me. I'm still blessed to have my parents in my life. They were a huge part of, I wanted to make sure that they were in favor and would support my actions. My husband and my children, of course. And those were the only people besides my lawyers who really had any idea of what I was considering doing. So this was the biggest decision of my life, the most risky. And so getting to that point was huge. And I would say after the fact, I always align it or draw the analogy that it was like jumping off of a cliff without any safety net below. This was before the Harvey Weinstein allegations. This was a year and a half before the Me Too movement really took off. Of course, there have been other women who have come forward, but this was really the first for me doing this in the latest iteration of really getting attention on these issues. So I thought, who's going to prop me up when I take this huge risk? And, it almost happened immediately, where I realized that the buoy of support was all these other women who started reaching out to me saying, me too. This also happened to me, and I was also silenced. And, it was like the same horrible story that I was hearing from thousands of people across our country. And that's really what picked up my spirits and made me realize I have to do something to pay tribute to all of these other women who have lost their jobs for simply having courage, who have been forced into silence because they had to sign NDAs, which is what I fight against now. And I have to do something to change the laws. And so that was really the impetus for the disruption in my life and the change that put me on a whole new course.
That takes a lot of really digging deep, in that it's affecting you and it affects everybody else in your family as well. So it's not necessarily a singular decision. And in terms of people in the and women in the profession and your colleagues, what was that like for you, and what support did you get?
Well, I can count on one hand how many people have actually reached out to me from Fox in the last 8 years. So, look, my lawyer said to me that the number one thing is, the toughest thing will be that people are going to malign you. They're going to call you a liar. They're going to, not believe you. And that was all true. So I really did rely on the support of my very close friends and that inner circle. But when you do something like this, I kind of equate it to when somebody dies. And in our culture, people don't know what to say to people in those situations, right? And so what do? They do nothing, right? Because they're like too nervous to address it. Or when they send them a sympathy card, they just sign their name. And one of the greatest lessons that I learned from my father was, in those situations, you should always write memories, because that's what the people want to hear. They want you to have that human relationship with you. And I'm not trying to equate what I did with death, but it's very similar in the sense that a lot of people who I knew very well never have acknowledged to me what I did. And so you really find out who your friends are in those kinds of situations. And I'll never forget, this one woman came up to me years later and said, you know, I was going to send you all these inspirational quotes, but I thought, oh, she's too busy. And I said, no, it would have been great if you had sent me those
One,
quotes. Yeah, one. I mean,
one.
so when she got home, she sent them to me, and I've cherished them. You know, it would have been, so look, this is a learning journey for all of us in how do we handle these kinds of things. And I hope that the work I'm doing now is making this process easier for so many other people, and that other people also find the courage to reach out to people when they go through a difficult time.
Yeah, I think for women in particular, there's something about, tend and befriend, and we're pretty good at giving it, and sometimes we're harder about receiving it or asking for it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. I mean, I was raised, luckily, by a very strong mother who told me every single day that I could be whatever I wanted to be. And I thought every young girl heard that. And it was only later in life that I realized so many people have not heard that. And so if you're watching now, I hope that you've heard that. And if you haven't, just believe that can happen for you too. So, when I was faced with this kind of a horrible situation, I never, ever, ever envisioned that this would happen to me. Like, it's not something that you aspire to put on your resume,
Right.
like poster child for sexual harassment in the workplace. And so I really had to dig deep into remembering what my mom always said to me, and the way in which I was raised to always work incredibly hard and go for it and stand up for myself, especially. And there's one story that happened to me when I went to my first day of kindergarten that I thought about a lot before I found the courage to come forward. And that was when, back in the olden days, when I was in kindergarten, they used to divide you into groups of kids who could read and kids who could not read. And the teacher put me in the group of who could not read, but I knew how to read. And so 3 times that day, I went up to her as a 5-year-old and said, but you put me in the wrong group. And she just kept telling me to go back and sit down. So I can still remember, running home from school, yelling for my mom, telling her what happened. And she called the school and she rectified it. But I've thought about that story a lot when I was about to do what I was going to do, because what if I hadn't done that for myself? What if I hadn't stood up for myself at a young age and realized and found out that when you do have your voice heard and you stand up for the truth, you actually correct the situation, right? And I wanted to honor that voice of that little girl that was still inside of me. And so that was something that really, propelled me into doing what I did. And so I hope that everyone has had that voice in their head, or if not, that they're listening today and they feel inspired to, finally do something that has been really gnawing away at them.
When you were advocating for yourself as a 5-year-old, which really takes a lot, especially, some of our messaging about being a girl is to, be nice and
Of
to
course.
be a pleaser and to not. And I want to really highlight here that not only did you stand up once and said, I'm in the wrong group, but you went back again. And when I think about 5-year-olds and, and really a 5-year-old Gretchen, like, no, I'm in the wrong group, and going back there again, that takes this foundation that either you can have it and have it built, or it's never too late to build it, right?
True.
It's never too late. And you added so many layers of that from where you started of, I'm in the wrong group, to sexual harassment, I don't think so.
Right. Yeah. And it's just one example of, I think some of that may have been innate in me as being a fighter, but also I learned it, it is learned behavior to believe in yourself and to stand up for your convictions. And it certainly was much more difficult to do what I did in my adult life, in blowing the whistle on, something bad that was happening to me at work. But yes, it's a great life lesson if you're a parent and how you're raising your children. I've certainly passed that along to my children, and they were my paramount concern. They were in middle school at the time, and that's tough enough for kids,
Right.
and didn't want to be made fun of. But You know, they've really surprised me in the sense that my courage, I've seen it transfer to them. And even if that was all that I've accomplished over the last 8 years, was that would be enough. But I know that my courage has transferred to thousands and thousands of other people, and um, I never could have seen myself in this situation. But now I've, recreated myself yet again, and now I'm an advocate for change, for, more safety in the workplace.
How did you figure this out? I mean, because you're in a lawsuit. I mean, it's unpleasant. No one really says, gee, what I would like to do tomorrow when I wake up is, start a lawsuit against an entity that's massive with a lot of massive forces, they're supporting it. And so how did you go from that space to this space of where am I going to take this now?
Well, again, it was the people who reached out to me and they said they had all been silenced. And so I realized that not only was there an epidemic of sexual misconduct still at work in America, but there was an epidemic of pushing the problem away and silencing it. And that's why, as a society, we thought that we had solved this because we weren't hearing about these cases. But the reason we weren't hearing about these cases is because they were all going to secrecy. And so I figured out that there were two things that I had to look into to try and change. The first one was non-disclosures, and those have just become pervasive in our society. I mean, we're hearing a lot about them now with the Diddy case, right? And the alleged sexual misconduct that he was doing. He had everyone sign an NDA. It's just become commonplace in our society, and that's also happening at work. 1/3 of all Americans sign NDAs on their first day of work that precludes them from talking about anything that happens to them in the future. I mean, it's just crazy when you think about it. So I was able to pass a law called the Speak Out Act on Capitol Hill that makes that, you can't do that anymore for sexual misconduct in the workplace. It's one of the biggest labor law changes in the last 100 years. There's a second way that you're silenced in the workplace, and this is something people have no clue about. But instead of being able to file a lawsuit, which is your Seventh Amendment right, actually, there's something called forced arbitration, which is a different way to solve problems. And the original intent of this was to unclog the court systems so that, if you had a small little dispute with your neighbor, you weren't clogging up the court system by bringing a lawsuit. So arbitration was a way for both parties to come together and solve it, quicker, cheaper, and move on. The problem is that companies started incorporating that process at work to adjudicate human rights violations like race discrimination and sex discrimination and sexual harassment. And it's a secret process. So you have no clue that you've signed this in your contract or that it's in your employee handbook. And so you think you're doing the right thing. You go to complain, and then you find out that you've signed this clause and you can't file a lawsuit. You're going to go into this secret chamber and nobody's ever going to hear from you ever again. And that's what's been happening to all of these cases. So I started walking the halls of Congress to help tons of people who had been working on these issues for a long time. So I brought a sense of notoriety to this issue of arbitration. And we were able to, after a 5-year slog, get enough people on both sides of the fence with both parties to determine that we shouldn't allow that anymore. We should not allow people who experience sexual misconduct to be forced into this secrecy of arbitration. So that law also passed in 2022, and one of the greatest moments of my life, because this is a game changer for people at work. No longer do you have to be silenced with NDAs or forced arbitration for sexual misconduct. And we're already hearing about tons of people who have benefited from these laws. If you go to my website at liftourvoices.org, which is my nonprofit, we have a whole new testimonial video campaign of women and men who are talking about how these laws have given them justice.
And it's extraordinary that up until 2 years ago, that when you went to get a job, you didn't know that you were giving away your personal freedom. I mean, look, it's one thing to sign a non-disclosure that you're not going to share proprietary information, and that makes a great deal of sense. But to kind of slip in, on on the down low, um,
Yeah.
that you're also, by the way, having, signing away any right you have to bring up problems, and that you're then really like, secreted in. It's like, please come this way, and it's like two people come, and one each one like takes you under the arm and brings you into a dark room somewhere else where your hands are tied and your mouth is duct tape.
That's exactly right. So these laws were paramount in this movement. I will say, though, Dr. Reiger, that as an organization, we fight for all protected classes. So if you are racially discriminated against, or because of your LGBTQ plus status, or because of disability or age or gender, you still can be forced into the secrecy of arbitration. So my work is not done yet. I'm still advocating on Capitol Hill and across different states to make sure that we can include all protected classes under these laws. So I've introduced, my latest bill has to do with age discrimination, so that you don't have to go to forced arbitration for age discrimination. It did pass a certain committee in the Senate, so it's moving along. But my goal is to make sure that all protected classes eventually are not going to be forced into secrecy.
When you're talking about your 5-year-old you, and of course, even up till the point of becoming 5, there's so much messaging that you get. There's so much encouragement or discouragement, and sometimes it doesn't even take, your mom, I'm mom, and that sometimes it's not even the words that you get, but all you need is one look, and right, one look, the one eyebrow goes up, and you're like, ah, because you know what it means. And that one of the things that can happen, and this is what I'm writing about and I'm very much committed to, is this idea that we leave parts of ourselves behind, and for all sorts of messaging. And it may exactly be those parts that we kind of think, well, we've turned the page, I've left it behind, but we don't.
Right.
It stays side by side with us, either there to help us, to learn from it, to take, if we've had a problematic experience, well, listen, calling what you experience problematic is really so wrong messaging. But there's what we take with us from experiences that are like that. I'm keeping with me. That little girl who stood up and said, oh yes, no, 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 I am in the wrong group. And obviously, as an adult, you said, you know what, I'm in the wrong group of sexual harassment being okay. And that also, as an adult, when you went on this path and now have gone on to advocate for thousands and tens of thousands, that you didn't just push away what happened to you, but what you did, and avoid it and just figure out some kind of way to push on, but that you took from that experience and what you learned from it and what was important to you, and you took those pieces of yourself, right, to move on and to be able to advocate and to push and to have a voice and to be that person in front of the camera, whether it's on the big screen or here we are together on the small screen, and get it going with all of who you are and what power that is in it.
Yeah. And I hope that my experiences in my life can be inspirational to other people to be able to lift themselves up as well. I mean, that's my whole mission now. I always say that I'm helping millions of people I'll never meet, and that keeps me going. I mean, that it doesn't matter how many television interviews I've done as a journalist in my life. Nothing is more important than what I'm doing now, and this will be my legacy. And it was completely unexpected. So my story is one of inspiration, I hope, for others who feel stuck, or have experienced things that they don't think they can pull themselves out of. That I've done it and turned it into something good, and the greatest benefit to me personally is knowing that I'm helping so many others.
And knowing that you're helping so many others, like you say, that you may never know, or that you already accept that you will never know. And this is what this is the moment of that, the ripple in the, throwing the pebble in. pardon me, throwing the pebble in, and you throw a pebble in the water and there's this ripple effect.
Exactly. And I know that that happened too with just the courage part of this, you know, because so many other, I mean, that's how we got to the Me Too movement, right? Is that it was sort of this perfect storm of social media where people felt comfortable to be able to come forward either with their names or anonymously. It was the fact that the media started covering these stories because they didn't care about sexual harassment until that point in time. And it was also the American public who got mad about it. And they were like, wait a minute, as I said earlier, we thought we solved this. And then they realized that they had been totally bamboozled because all of this has gone to secrecy. So it was this perfect storm of all those things coming together to really make this movement last. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm never giving up. So, you know, legislators know when they see me coming again, they're like, oh, her again. But they know I'm relentless. So it's part of the reason why we've been able to get so much done.
Well, I think that at this point, when I hear you say, oh, here she comes again, I'm thinking about if I was hearing that as you, I would take that as the biggest compliment going. If somebody said that to me, you know, to you, I was, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You know, because that is it. That's where it lives. When you know in your whole soul, when you know all, you know, you're talking about alignment with social media, but there's also an, and you know, the psychologist in me, Gretchen, here I am, you know, you know, but when we're in alignment in ourselves, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's comfortable, right? It's
Yes.
not necessarily a space of comfort and courage. And maybe we can highlight this also. Courage doesn't mean that you're not afraid or not uncomfortable. That is not what courage means. So could you share your view about courage?
Yeah, I mean, I think courage is the most uncomfortable of any kind of actions that you're about to take on, because that's why they call it courage. I mean, if it was simple, we wouldn't call it that. So I think that in these moments, look, you touched on this earlier. We don't raise our girls to be courageous or to take as many risks as we do our boys. We tell them to go jump off the fence and skin their knees up, and we tell the girls to sit in the corner and look pretty and play with their dolls. So we socialize people from a very early age, especially girls, to not be courageous. And I hope I'm also changing that. You know, we need to examine the words that we say to our kids, and going through this experience myself of courage on my own. I started changing the way I parented too, because I started realizing that I mean, I had always been lifting up my daughter, but I started lifting her up even more, and specifically started lifting up my son to respect young women so that eventually when he gets into the workplace, he will respect them in a manner of not sexually harassing them, and think of them as equals. And so I've actually learned through this process that yes, we have to lift up our girls and give them these skills to be courageous and risk takers, but we also have to teach our boys at an early age to respect women. And that has been one of the greatest lessons that I've learned.
It's so crucial. It is absolutely crucial, you know, regardless of, you know, when you have boys, to teach them. And I always wondered, I don't know if this happened with you, but I always wondered, like, these men, don't they have sisters or aunties or mommies or,
Yeah, it's all
and
about power. You know, that's what the conclusion I've come to is that it's yeah, I get asked all the time, like, what are the psychological problems with people who do this? I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist. But I will tell you that I believe it has a tremendous amount to do with power and feeling that there's some sort of a threat to that. And so that's why you teach or treat people in the way that they do. And you know, so again, changing the cultural aspects of this, much tougher than anything else. But that's the second piece of the puzzle after we pass the laws.
and there we have it. So we're here at time. And Gretchen, thank you so very much. I know that this conversation will have great impact and appreciate your time sharing not just what happened, but your heart and your thoughts and your internal experience with us, for us to be able to take this messaging internally, powerfully and courageously, and go forward, taking you with us.
Thank you.
So, okay, so here we go. And thank you. Thanks so much for coming on. And for everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Come back next week. We're going to see you again on Disruptive Conversations. Always so much more to learn and to take with us. See you then. And remember that positive change can happen at any point in time. You're never too late.
Thank you.